All right.
Hello, everyone. We are back, and today we are going to be talking about channeling the dead, communication with ghosts and spirits. And again, we're going to have our friend Iggy Garcia pop in with his cultural perspectives of spirits. I'm going to share some of my experiences as a medium with spirits, but we're going to start with you, Dr. J. I think starting spiritual movement and how that kind of allowed our society to see spirits in a way that might not be the authentic viewpoint, right?
Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk about, okay, so my name is Susan Josephson, doctor, because I have a PhD in philosophy. And we're going to talk about the spiritualist movement. We're going to start there because, as we said in the last podcast, which was about white, mostly women, shaman, and how people are very suspicious of that, how in the European culture, shamanism was stomped on with both feet. Women were put to the stake for being medicine women, for being midwives, for even just for doing prophecy and divining, because that was considered against the Christian paradigm. And so the spiritualist movement, which is a good place to start because the spiritualists were trying to get a movement going where European women, especially, and they were focusing on women. This was starts in 1849, where the women could then do these sorts of things, could do spiritual healing, advice giving, you know, telling the future and that sort of thing. And so it was done in the context of a religion, mostly in the context of Christianity. So they believed that the only kinds of spirits that there were ghosts of people, dead people, angels, and demons. And they did their work mostly by channeling ghosts. Now, from our perspective, I mean, that is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yes, yes.
But they didn't see that. And a lot of that, and one of the things that's interesting about them also is, again, from this sort of perspective of Europeans, white, so white just means European, really. Europeans contacting spirits, was that they thought that the only kinds of spirits that they have to worry about were dead people, and that, for example, their seances, they did these in the dark because they thought that that was the only time that spirits would come forward. And but this was actually, again, as we know, false.
False news.
Yes,
Where did
and
they get their reference from? Is it the Bible? Were they trying to so you're saying they're mixing Christianity and the Bible
with
with
their
the unseen
spiritual
world?
stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, like, you've had experience with ghosts. Tell us something about your experiences.
Well, which one do I think about? They're
I know.
definitely in a category,
Well,
right? Because once we leave our body, they'll go either some will wait around with a loved one for a while, some will come back. So most of my interactions with ghosts will be people who come to me for a reading, a mediumship, and they almost always say the same thing. They almost always say, we're at peace, we love you, we're proud of you. And then there are the spirits that have incomplete, they don't feel complete with their life mission, and they will come in with a lot of anger. So I remember one ghost coming in, a teenager, she had lost her dad. He had been killed in a police chase and drugs. And so when she came to me, he came in right to my ear and he went, and I had red bloodshot eyes for 2 weeks. So talk about danger. You just can't be, when people say, "Oh, I'd like to talk to my loved one," I go, "Oh, maybe not me."
Exactly.
And the second one is the ghosts that follow me home, right? There's the ones that go, "Oh, she can talk to me," so they follow me home, and they basically, like all the other humans I work with, they want a therapist or a spiritual counsel.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's part of the thing. It's like one thing that is odd and about the spiritualists, and not all of the spiritualists were inauthentic, were fake, but a lot of them were. And but one thing that is suspicious about their way of doing it is they didn't have that kind of experience. What happened when they called the dead, what happened was that the dead would say, they would ask the dead random questions like, how does it feel to be in heaven? What does it feel like to be dead? And tell, and then, they'd have somebody in the audience, they, well, give so and so some advice, something like that. That's not how it happens. Or knock once for yes and twice for no. So as I told the story that I told last time, had to do with the very first ones, the Fox sisters, who it turns out that their ghost was supposedly somebody who had been murdered in the house where they were living, moved with them to another house and communicated through knocking. And then they confessed that they had been doing the knocking by cracking their toes and their, like that. And sometimes they had, some of the seances would have protoplasm and the dead would blow trumpets, and this is all fake stuff. And the reason why people at that time were really impressed with that is that all of our cultural knowledge about the dead had already been wiped out. We can't tell the difference between something that is fake and something that is real. And so one of the things that it comes out of kind of thinking about the way the spiritualist movement did things was, first of all, that they thought that all dead were human. they were either they were either channeling humans or angels or demons. Now, in my experience, I've had a couple of times when the Virgin Mary came to me, which is kind of surprising, but there you go. But uh, demons, in my experience, have never come to me, but the people to whom the demons have appeared are people who think that all spirits, all are demons. They're horrible things. All they want to do is horrible stuff. And this is, I had a woman, and then Iggy has joined us. I had a woman once who came to me. She really wanted me to help her because she was doing trance drumming and spirits came. Well, what would you expect? I mean, if you're drumming to call spirits and then they come, right? The spirits came, and that made her really angry and frightened, and she would shout at them, and she wanted me to help them go away. And I asked her, well, if you're drumming to call the spirits and they show up, why do you think they're demons? And she explained to me that all spirits are demons. And then I asked her, well, if you think all spirits are demons, why are you calling them? And she said, well, because she's a shaman and that's what shamans do. And I'm thinking, you poor lady, you are confused. She was saying, well, she does healing. And I asked her, what kind of healing do you do? Oh, I lay on hands for healing. Well, then what? And then she said, what do you mean, then what? I absorbed their illnesses. She was actually a very sick woman. I mean, literally, physically, very sick woman. And I said, well, you can't just absorb it. You have to have some way of getting it out of you. You can't take it in and not take it out. And it was too late for her. It was too late for her to change. It was too late for her to re-understand this. But this also emphasized that people in our culture are really clueless about the dead and about spirits. And then I was wondering if Iggy maybe wanted to tell us about his cultural expectations from his background culture, his original culture, uh, their ideas about the dead and spirits and that sort of thing.
Oh, I'm excited to hear some stories. I want to say really quick because that brought up something in me. I'm seeing on social media and I'm seeing through my peer group a lot of people doing medicine work. And so I'm glad we're talking about this because the safety of it is so imperative. I can't even imagine people getting the possessions that I've had and the calling in the spirits that I have and not having any guidance or knowledge. So I'm so glad we're talking about this. Oh my gosh, so good. Hi, Iggy.
Hi, how are
Welcome.
you? My
How are
apologies.
you?
Had a little technology problem here, but Zoom decided to update while I was trying to get on. No, so yeah, thanks for having me back on. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. Can you hear me? Okay,
Mhm.
perfect. So one of the first things I learned very quickly is energy follows intent. So your intentions are very important on when you're doing this kind of work, shamanic work, especially. Um, I was listening to what you were saying about how people absorb the energies and they don't know, you're not supposed to hold on to that stuff. You're correct about that. You have to you have to have a strategy. Just being a shamanic practitioner or a shaman, whatever you want to call yourself, there's a lot that goes into it. And then in my culture, the dead are very much around us, but my mom would always say, be more wary of the living than the dead. That was always her said. Don't be, don't be afraid of the dead, because that's part of our culture. That's part of who we are. They're with us. Our ancestors are always with us. They never disappear. They just become another version of themselves. It's kind of like being in the cocoon and the caterpillar and all that story, and they evolve and become something completely different. In my culture, the dead are very much part of our lives. We recognize them, we honor them, or, depending on whoever you are, too. Culturally, we've changed a lot, too, over the years where people have lost a lot of old traditional ways. A good example is the Mexican culture is the Dia de los Muertos. That's a very big traditional thing in that culture. All culture has something very similar to that. We don't celebrate it as much, as maybe other cultures do. But we're very cognitively aware. What we do is we actually have pictures of people, and on Monday we light a candle every day on Monday. Everybody who's transitioned or passed, so we can open up a passageway for them to go to heaven or whatever their true belief was where they were going to go. And so we would, it's called, what's it called? What did my mom used to call it? Son the purgatorio, which is purgatory. We call it purgatory. Is where our judgment, not necessarily judgment, but where we go first before we go whatever we transition into. And so we're very big on that aspect in our culture, is honoring for us, the living, to pray for them for safe passage into the next incarnation or heaven or whatever they believe in. And a lot of that has to do with Catholicism too. Catholicism also is one of the things that came to a lot of these countries here all through this hemisphere of the world. Catholicism also incorporated a lot of traditional ways in order to bring people into the church. So, in order for you to gain someone's trust, well, let them pray this little way, but teach them about Christ at the same time. So that's kind of how they did it. We have a lot of saints. We have a lot of things. Lay on hands. We have a saint, Saint Martin de Porres. He's a patron saint of Peru. He's a black saint, and he is known to have 3 miracles. His 3 miracles was laying on hands during the Chilean conflicts and stuff. He would actually go on both sides of the front and heal people with his hands. The wounded, he would heal them. And then the other one was that he would transpose his body physically into other countries, mostly in different regions of Africa. He would appear to the people. This has historically been documented. And so he would actually never left Peru. So he would physically appear. His other miracle was that he brought animals together to drink from one bowl. You know, the mouse, the cat, the dog, and they all drank. That's a miracle. So those are some of the things that we incorporate. So we're really connected to religion. We're really connected to spirituality. There is no home in Peru that does not acknowledge the dead, and they all have our superstitions. We all have our ways. We looked at things. You know, we do certain things. You know, we drive by a cemetery. We go like this. It doesn't matter. It's automatic. You know, we acknowledge the dead. You know, we give thanks because we know that one day we're going to be there. We're going to be the ancestors. Now, in different cultures in Peru, different tribes and stuff, they all have the different ways of doing things. I can't say that I'm an expert on all those because I would be lying to you, because everybody has their own way. But in my traditional way is that we always honor them by acknowledging them and know in praying to them. I know some people say you shouldn't pray to the dead. That we're not really praying to the dead. We're praying to the memory and the belief and the idea that these people were with us and that they gave us some of their knowledge and their DNA and their blood and their, I'm part of my dad, I'm part of my mom, part of my grandfather, my grandmother, my great grandmother, and just a whole lineage of people. They go way back. So it's pretty powerful when we acknowledge. I've taught my kids to be that way, to acknowledge, the passing of their grandparents, and they pray to their grandparents. They give thanks, please, because we really truly don't know anything, right? We only know what we know. We only know what's been taught to us by the generation before us. And so we're going to go with faith that what they taught us is correct until we can find new evidence that it's not that way. So I find it very magical when in our culture is that our families are super important, and our families never leave our sides. Our family always with us. And, that's one of the things. And it's just like in this culture, people go to the cemetery, they visit, they drop flowers, they have their own way of doing it. But in Peru, we have our little celebrations. We also have a place in the table, for someone to be there and honor them. We do that. We honor the table. Like on my birthday, we had a space for my sister, my mom, my dad, and Quinlan, my nephew, who passed away. And, we had a place for them because they were newly departed. So the newly departed, we always help them transition. It's our job to remember them, never forget them.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, now let me tell a story that's got a completely different perspective to show how different the cultures can be. My mother had this land in New Mexico between Espanola and Santa Fe, 274 acres, I think it was at that time, which had ruins of two pueblos that had been, all of the natives there had been killed off by the Spanish 100 years, some 100 years, a couple hundred years earlier. But there was a neighboring pueblo where the people had decided that it was time for them to go extinct, that this was no longer a time for Native Americans, and so they had decided not to reproduce. So this was now in the late 60s, 1960s, something like that. My mother rented her house on this land to this woman who was a graduate student in anthropology. I don't know how far along she was in her studies, but she was very interested in this pueblo that had decided that they were going to go extinct. And she thought that she would use them as a study, and she would write down their traditions and their histories and thereby preserve something of their culture even after they were gone. So she had good motives. This house was a mud brick house, one room, mud floor. Actually, we helped my mother build it. And it didn't have a door. It just had a blanket over the entrance. What did you need a door for except to keep the wind out? There was no humans all for, many miles on all directions. So this woman then went to this pueblo where they had decided to go extinct, and she thought, well, surely it would be the old men who were the holders of the histories and the and the knowledge, the cultural knowledge from one generation to another, and so she would interview them. So she went to the old men and then she asked them questions. And first she wanted to lay out a kinship structure. So who is related to whom, and ask them about their ancestors. Well, what were the names of your grandparents, great grandparents, great great grandparents, and tell me something about them, and write out their lineages. So she did this and interviewed 7 or 8 of these old men. She thought it was all going well. And then one evening came this pickup truck across the road. There was a dirt road you had to climb, you had to go through a riverbed to get to this house. I mean, it was really in the outback. They came up and they parked outside of her little house. And the guys got out of the pickup, and they shouted through the door, and they said, well, we want to know, which one of us do you want to fuck first? Or do you want to do it with all of us at the same time? Or what? How do you want, some of us watch, how do you want to do this? She was shocked and horrified. And she said, no, go away, and they, okay, they got in their pickup truck and they left. She packed up and left. So when my mother came a few weeks later, she asked the people of that pueblo what went on, what was this about? And they said, well, she came, instead of like a normal woman talking to the women, she talked to the men. And instead of talking to the men who were her contemporaries, she was talking to the old men. And what was she asking them? She was asking them for the name of the dead. But in their culture, they do not acknowledge the dead. They have the belief that the dead are powerful and only witches try to contact the dead. And so they were thought that she must be a witch, because she was asking them about the names of their dead. She was trying to get power from them. And they had a meeting of their group, and they decided, well, witches have unnatural appetites. So the only explanation they could come up with for why this anthropologist would be interviewing old men, only old men, was because she had the hots for these old men. And so they agreed that it was okay, because they were old and because she was a white woman, it was okay for them to have sex with her. If there were a baby from that, it wouldn't belong to the tribe anyway. It wouldn't have any relationship to them. So they thought, well, she must be a witch. And so they were going to satisfy her unnatural appetites. So what this shows, I mean, one thing, this poor woman was really insensitive. I mean, she really should have thought this thing through more. But it also shows how different cultures are. So from your background, from Iggy's background culture, the dead are still with us. And that's certainly how in our little family, we also do that. And we have the yahrzeit, so yearly candle that we burn for 10 days or whatever for the dead, and so on and so on. And just as you were saying, we have that attitude. But the American culture in general tends to be la, 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 right, about the dead. Dead, they're dead.
That would be my family. That would be my family. I mean, they really just bury and don't talk about it. And I mean, I remember no one really crying at my dad's funeral,
Yeah.
or, it's very strange. It's a very strange way of being, especially coming from, we have Irish, we have all the, in Irish, we would have the wailers. And I feel like I've got that in me where I want to like wail at funerals and wail in grief. But, growing up, all my experiences have been like, okay, don't talk about them, they're gone. And of course, being a medium and being a medicine person, I have access to them coming to me, and I'm like, but I wasn't taught. I wasn't taught about that was a thing.
Yeah,
In
that's
fact,
right.
my grandfather came to me. He committed suicide when I was 1, and he came to me and he was severely alcoholic, kind of abusive man. He was, repressed. And he came to me, he said, "Oh, I had all the gifts you had. I could see it all and I could feel it all. And it was awful. And that's why I had to die. And then my mom recently gave me, I don't know what I did with it. I was like, I don't want this. But recently here in Columbus, Ohio, at one of the sites with graves, all the people on her father's line, and they're all dying like early. They're all just sad and sick and depressed. And, I don't know. It's very sad, actually. I'm glad I have you guys and
Yeah,
to be in connection with spirits.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
wanted to add something real quick.
Sure.
I forgot to add. We also in our traditions in Peru, we also believe that the person travels for 40 days and 40 nights, visiting every place that they've been in the world and every almost every situation, every place they've known. So for us, it's kind of like really cool because then you get to sometimes you'll get this messages. Like the other day, my dog was barking at the ceiling.
Yeah,
My big Great Dane was like looking up at the ceiling. Just I'm going. That must be one of my must be Quinlan because he's the newest departed because he was barking at the ceiling. Or my dad drops in sometimes too, and she barks at the ceiling.
yeah,
Or I'll
yeah.
say Papagino, and she'll go, she'll look around and
Yeah.
she'll find him. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and that 40 days thing, actually, that is very common. I mean, I don't know a culture that doesn't have that. I do know several cultures that Tibetans have that. The Native Americans, people think one thing, they think that the Native Americans, and it's one of the, all have the same beliefs. And
Yeah,
that's ridiculous. I mean,
no, yeah,
like even the Pueblo Indians, I mean, they were several cultures and antagonistic cultures. I mean, they're not the same culture at all. And but this idea of the 40 days is something that seems to be all of the cultures that I know of also have that belief that for 40 days after death, people hang out in some way or another, as you're saying, appear to others. I've never heard it in that detailed way, but for sure that is completely consistent. After 40 days, then then they do whatever it is they do and go wherever they
hmm
go, right?
yeah,
And of course, again, in the spiritualist communities, they had no idea about any of that, and they did not acknowledge any of that. And they thought that the spirits were just on the other side of a veil, so to speak, and we're just hanging out looking for something to do.
No.
And what and so every night at 10 o'clock you could call them and you could say, hey, how's it going? And then they would exactly, and then they would come and entertain your friends or your actually the crowds who pay to
yeah,
spectacle, right? And
mhm,
also they would think that the dead were there available to give advice to people who have nothing to do with them. And in my experience, that's not true. That the dead and if you from your culture it's something else, tell us. But in my experiences, the dead want to communicate with their descendants, with the people that they're related to, with their group, with their community. They're part of their own community as opposed to just a random stranger. Whereas for these poor spiritualists, they would get possessed by this dead person, and then Joe Schmo over there would ask a question, and the spirit would say, "Oh well, this and that's and the other." Well,
yeah,
how do they know that? I mean, why would they?
right.
You know, is that true
If
for
I
you?
don't know it now, I'm not going to know it dead.
Yeah,
Yeah, they,
Yeah.
they think they're talking to like the teacher spirits. They're
Yeah.
getting it confused. That's
Well,
teacher
that's it.
spirits.
That's it. That they did not realize, or from our perspective, they did not realize that it's much more complex than that, and that it's not just humans, and it's not just spirits. In my experience, there are spirits who were never flesh beings that have appeared to me. That there are spirits who are there in different realities that you can contact through trance that have never lived a life. They're not ghosts in any sense. Or there are people who, for example, my mother, who wanted at death, then after her 40 days, she turned into a buffalo spirit. And she appeared to me at that transitional point and showed me her self as mother burning up to express to me, don't call me as your mom, I ain't there. But however, as a buffalo spirit, then she had an agenda, which is the agenda to help maintain communication and balance between the spirit world and the human world. And within that agenda, she appears to me. And then she appears to me as a buffalo. And that's the kind of thing that is outside the spiritualist perspective.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You mentioned something earlier about how people just put everybody in a big pile, spiritually, and even culturally.
Yeah.
And I find that in the work that I do sometimes, that people just throw me in that soup, and they just, if it doesn't look like, why doesn't yours look just like this guy's? It's because I'm, number one, come from a different culture. Number two, I'm my own person.
Yeah.
Number three, I will develop the gifts that I've been endowed with.
Yeah.
And now the spirit aspects, what is really big right now, what I'm watching right now, is people are noticing like cardinals and blue jays. You probably heard that, where people say, oh yeah, there's a blue jay. That's my family member.
Okay.
Or it's a red cardinal. That's my mom. That's very powerful medicine. The bird medicine is very powerful. When my grandmother passed away, 4 cardinals came into the restaurant, flew into the restaurant, flew around, and they went up the exhaust fan of the restaurant. They didn't die, but I don't know where they went, because when I went up there to look to see them, I couldn't find them. And the same way with my father, there's a blue jay, which shouldn't still be here, but there's a big blue jay, like big blue, and he pops up and he always yells at me. Like my dad would whistle at me, hey. That's how he would call us kids. He'd whistle and we'd come marching and we were right there. And so this blue jay whistles at me for about in the morning, then he takes off. But it's kind of funny, this how you just instinctively know when an animal comes to you, that they're communicating. See, I think that through the spirit world, communication is very different. Back into this reality of this world, kind of you see the buffalo spirit. I see a lot of things in the trees. I see a lot of things in the water. I see a lot of things with birds, and through small little animals. But deer are huge in my medicine. I have deer medicine like crazy and owl medicine.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's exactly, that's also true for my experiences. When my brother, for example, became very ill and went to the hospital, the first I heard of it was an owl. And the hawks, very strong, as you say, very strong medicine. And I think also that's part, and again, again, in our contemporary reality, we're trying to wake up again to the natural world and the spirits in the natural world. And one of my purposes for this podcast was to articulate some of that one of the things that we see in the spiritualist movement is this completely human-centric reality, that it's just human beings all the way up to the top.
Yeah.
It's all human. And in my experiences, no, not at all. As you say, the trees, my goodness, the sentience of some of the trees are overwhelming, the trees and the birds, and as you say, the animals. Absolutely. And we need to wake up to that. If we're going to continue in this physical world as beings, we need to wake up to that part of it. And so the spiritualist movement taught that it was humans all the way down or all the way up, and that you could channel the dead without any problems, you know? And that was this other idea. It's like exorcism. Um, like, for example, one of the famous spiritualist stories is that there's this woman who did, again, to crowds, right, to make money, did her, so channeling, you're a medium, right? You're not interpreting anything, you're just channeling the spirit voices that come in. And that was how they thought of it. So she was just, people would ask questions and then she would channel this uh, Native American female who died when she was a teenager. And the story goes that when she first started channeling this Native American, the Native Americans spoke in their native language with a few words of English, but then she taught the spirit English. And then after that, the spirit spoke exactly like she did, only with a little high voice. And
I
now,
don't
if
know
that
about
didn't
that one.
sound suspicious to people at the time,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, I cannot believe, I mean, even though there's great cultural diversity, that one could teach a dead person a new language.
We'll just say false news, false news. I've had like star beings come in to talk to people during their readings and sessions, my little star being earrings, and I'll say, I don't speak your language. There's no way we can interpret this. Can you show me a picture or can you give me a feeling? But yeah, that's funny about the language piece. And there's also the piece too. Um, I don't know how much, like for example with my dad when he crossed over, he had to go to an emergency place in those 40 days. I remember I could not get a hold of him or see him. I didn't see him until maybe a couple years afterwards. So I think, so just like our human lives are so unique and so the way we're born, the way we're raised, I wonder if my experience has been as spirits cross over, it's that unique too. Like sometimes, like Iggy mentioned, purgatory. Maybe I feel like my dad had to go to a space to calm his spirit because his death was so traumatic from drowning on his lung fluid. And so it took him a long time to be able to come back and be in contact. And then the last time I contacted him, well, I'd say a couple years ago, he's like, I'm in school. I'm in school. And I'm like, you can go to school on the other side. Like there's so much we don't know about, what our little souls can do once it's out of this meat sack. But I've learned a lot from him and I've learned a lot from, doing readings for other people. One time, this old man, I was doing a reading for an older woman, just lost her husband. He said, I won't leave her. I won't leave her until she's ready to go. So he was going to go past the 40 days. He was like, I'm in it to win it with her. I'll be right by her side. It was so sweet.
Well,
Oh.
and I mean, and that's something too that, again, the spiritualists didn't acknowledge or didn't understand, and I think is important to point out is that if there's a ghost in your space, there's a reason. I mean, and the point isn't to, like these poor spiritualists when they were doing exorcisms, right? They would just get out the demon, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that about? You got to find out why they're there and then help them figure it out so they
Yeah.
can leave if they want to leave. You know what I mean? So understand what's going on from their perspective.
Well,
You
first
wouldn't
of all,
shout at a human and say, get out of my, I mean, maybe you
yeah,
would, but I
get
can
out of
tell you
the
what's good.
house.
Go ahead.
It's funny that you say that because it's just like animals when they have their and this innate ability to know where they come from. When the deer cross the road, they're in your backyard. that all used to be their woods. They used to be their home. In the same way with like ghosts or whatever appears in your house, that's where they were. That's why they're familiar with that. It's familiar energy. Remember, we live on a big magnet. The planet is one big, huge magnet. We have a magnet. The magnet just goes around and around, and we're part of that magnet. So we're attracted to certain things. That's why I said like energies attract. You go to a place where it's more comfortable. So sometimes people just don't want to deal with it because they're number one, they're afraid. People are always afraid of the unknown. Fear is a big thing. And when spirits try to communicate to you, or ghosts, whatever you want to call them, sometimes they don't know how to, because it's a whole new language over there. It's a whole new way of communicating. It's a whole new experience. I don't know if ghosts are feeling the feelings that how we feel. I don't know. And maybe they missed something. But there is a signature. There is an energy signature that's left behind too. Just like when you see certain things, energetically, we see them. It's kind of like the lights in space. They burned out a long time ago. Well, ghosts are kind of like that too. They leave a signature. At the restaurant when we had Garcia's, we had many people tell us about this long white-haired lady, and she'd wear a white gown, and she'd walk through the restaurant. In one Thanksgiving, we invited everybody like we always do, and my friend's sitting at the table, and he's talking to himself. And my friend never known him to talk to himself. And I go over to him, and I go, "What's up? Wait, what are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I'm just talking." And he just did one of these. I was talking to this little lady with long white hair. And he's just like, he got embarrassed, But this isn't the first time. I've seen her too. I don't see them all the time, but I'll see this apparition walk through. But when my dad would tell me when they go in the girls' restroom, somebody would touch their hand. They would feel like someone's touching their hand. And so it's really cool.
Missed that.
No, but it's really cool. You've been to Garcia's, you've been to my restaurant, but I've seen this lady. And I remember one time I got married to Susie. I was at her mom and dad's house, and this long white-haired lady in a gown. I woke up, and she looked like she was trying to pet my head, and she was looking down at me, and I wasn't scared. I just didn't know what was going on. I was like, oh, I'm like, and I look over to Susie, and I looked over, and she was gone. It's just kind of crazy. So I think our ancestors stay with us, or I think sometimes they're attracted to vibrational energies that are similar to theirs. Kind of like if you're into this work and they were into that work, then there's a match. They come together versus repelling each other. It brings in, and they have different ways of sharing. We learn some people channel differently. Some people channel visually. Some people open their mouth. Some people sing. Some people don't say anything. Some people just feel. I just wanted to share that story. I thought it was really cool.
Oh, that makes sense. And also, for example, the ancients had that, like the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians, they thought that there were several spirits in our bodies, and one can stay here. One can, if it want, you know what I mean. So not all of it. Their idea. Some die with the body. Some leave, some can stay.
Yeah.
And so that would make sense for the kinds of experience you're talking about. I mean, I've also had similar sorts of experiences and again, the thing is, there's no sense being afraid. You accept it and try to figure it out, or it's
What about the ones that give me nightmares that I have to get hold of you and say, why did I have death murder dreams all night?
Those aren't bad. Those necessarily aren't bad.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't think there are good or bad. I think there's very few bad people, in flesh or out. I think there's wounded, right? And they're like the first ghost that I really interacted with once I was really opening up was at Shakti Shakedown. He followed me back from Shakti Shake. The first haunting I've had here. I've been here for 9 years in this house, and I have this haunting. I'm like, great, this sucks. Like, I don't have time for this. And I remember he was a little gay guy who rode the Coda bus, and he OD'd on. I learned, and I want to mention this because this might be helpful if someone's being haunted. I wrote his story, and do you remember this, Susan? We came up with this. I wrote a story out on paper, and I read it, and just like every human in flesh who comes to me for a session or for friendship or anything, this ghost wanted to just be seen and heard and empathized with. And I think that's a lot of the haunting experience I've had is like, oh my God, you have compassion. You have the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and make me feel that connection empathically. And when I get a ghost that comes here, follows me home or finds me, that's usually what they want. They're like, hey, can you just like, but they don't have to give me murder dreams to do that. Can we skip that part? I guess that's the only way I'd know they're around because I'm kind of like, I'm busy.
Absolutely. They oftentimes, I mean, they're here for a reason. You know, there's something that and sometimes it's a vow. I mean, again, as Iggy said, you know, or you were, I can't remember, you were saying, one of you was saying, sometimes it's a vow that they're not going to leave for some reason. And for example, we did transitions once in this church in Binghamton, New York, and it was Cultivating Bliss Retreat, and the church was haunted. In the basement, there was a bathroom there, and there was coming out of the floor, there were these very violent negative energies that wanted to possess someone. And the church people asked me if I wanted to do an exorcism. And I said, absolutely not, because it was clear to me that this was vengeful energy and it was probably Iroquois, because the city was built on an Iroquois town, and the church was built on a holy spot, and these were spirits that were angry at what had happened and wanted revenge. The only way that they would be calmed would be for someone from their own culture with their own traditional rituals to help them see, okay, but the people that you're feeling vengeful for actually aren't here anymore. You know,
Interesting.
you can stop,
Interesting.
you can stop, but I couldn't do that. I mean, had I opened up, they would have possessed me, and the point would have been to get me to do bad things, vengeful things, and I had to be very careful in that when we did that session. Everybody was getting the spirits that we called the deity and so on that we called kept saying, have no fear, but guard yourself, and that's another thing that people should realize, that they can be possessed, and that in one way that I've known that you can guard yourself is by covering your hara. So that's the area right below your belly button. This is often the way that they might come in, and that it's the idea is that most of the ghosts, and I think the three of us certainly agree, this isn't just human ghosts. I mean, I've been haunted by cats that have died, and people have been haunted. I have a friend who's haunted by her dog, her dead dog.
My dog can haunt me forever. I don't want him to ever leave me.
Exactly.
He's my best friend forever. Exactly. So I'm wondering, because we're getting close to the hour, if we should do the possession. I don't know. Do we already have like a talk on possession
Yeah. So I think I was trying to slip in some of the thing there at the end, but
we've got time.
The idea is that ghosts can appear. I mean, especially ghosts, as opposed to. I mean, it's complicated, right? It's complicated, but the idea is that and I think Iggy mentioned this too, what you project, you will experience. And so if you project fear and anger, you will experience fear and anger. I mean, you will experience something fearful.
Yeah.
For example, many years ago, when one of my kids was a teeny person, and he was crying and crying, and I was, rocking him, and uh, and then I saw this monster coming across the street. I looked out the front window, and I saw this monster coming across the street, coming onto the porch. And thought, oh my God, this monster is gonna get us. I was terrified. I thought the monster wanted to eat us. I
Mm.
ran into the bathroom with my son, although why I thought that would help, I don't now know.
Right.
Lock the door, right? Oh my God, But then I learned many years later that that wasn't a monster that was trying to eat us. It was we were doing the Sufi. This is the Sufi movement. And when you do that, dancing, you dance. When you
Yeah.
dance a certain way, then the deity as love comes to you and then becomes part of you. And you open to the infinite love of the deity. Now, that would have been a very, very beautiful trip. And it would make sense because I was dancing in love with my child. But because I didn't know that, I was approaching it with fear and shock and anger, and so that's how it then approached me. So if you don't want to be eaten by the by the monster,
No, no.
don't think it's a monster. See
Yeah.
the love.
Wondering what that I reached out to both of you just a few weeks ago. I was going to a loving birthday party, a sip and paint with friends, and there was this stream. I got literally like in Ghostbusters, I got slimed. I forgot to put up protection. That's part of it. Like a sensitive person like me needs to protect if I'm going to be a normal person for a night. But that's when I had all the murder dreams, and I woke up and I just felt like I had to spend the whole day cleansing. Iggy was like teaching me about lemon juice, and I just in that case, I wonder, like, I didn't feel like I had a bad attitude. It felt like it was just that, I don't know what would cause a stream of, and they were mostly human, right? Like just wounded humans in a river of grossness.
I mean, I mean, I would have to quote unquote look, right? And this
Yeah.
isn't the circumstance to see actually what was going on, but my sense would be that it wasn't that you were approaching with that attitude, but rather that there were spirits who were in great distress, and that you looked like someone who could be empathetic. You were open, and you're used to carrying spirit energy. So you're kind of like a container. And so they were coming to you out of their distress. Look, 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 look. Oh, here's someone we can see. They could see you,
Yeah.
because I
That
don't
makes
think they
sense.
can
That makes
mostly
sense.
see people, but they
It's like
can
I got a
see.
Ghostbusters badge on. Even
Oh,
even if I go
exactly.
to a party, I can't take it off.
Exactly. They could see you. And
Yeah.
that was what was going on.
Yeah, I had a client like that who had a daughter who was, they called her, she was being possessed, but I felt that it was someone visiting her and had a very similar situation to her and was trying to communicate. And I actually went into this room. This is like 5 years ago. I went to the room with the girl, and she was crazy, acting all crazy. And what do you want? I just sat there and just started talking to her, just like I'm talking to you guys, and say, hey, what's going on? And then she just broke down and started crying. Sometimes, in shamanism, we talk about the art of listening. And sometimes we have to listen so we can hear what's trying to be said. And after that, the little girl was fine. And whatever was possessing her or with her or next to her was no longer there. Because we did a little ceremony, to release and let go of the pieces and parts that she holds onto and then the other held onto. And eventually she was fine. And her mom was like, what did you do? I said, I just listened. I just listened, because sometimes in this culture we don't listen. We want to fix things. We want everything fixed. We got to fix it. You got to get rid of this. You got to put that, I want. It's what you want. It's not necessarily what is actually happening. There's a lot happening in the house, but in that particular moment, it was about listening. But it was really powerful. It was one of the ones that was really like, wow, this is like, anything could happen in here. But it was really cool though. It was a good experience.
I love that
That
story.
that's
That's sweet.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's very sweet. And that absolute exorcism, I mean, that's something you need to be able to do. I mean, that's part of the job, so to speak, is to be able to do
Yeah.
that. And sometimes you can't.
Sometimes you can't. You're right.
I mean, there's nothing that can be done. And sometimes you can't. And like you say, listening, I mean, that's so, so important. And as Dawn also says, it's listening.
Hmm.
Oftentimes that's what's needed. They need someone to listen.
Yeah.
That's
That's how
right.
we get humans to calm down, right? Like whether it's a 3-year-old, that's as soon as I would get down on my daughter's level, 2 or 3, throwing a fit, I just go, "You're so angry right now." And she'd be like, "Yes, I am." And I found out it works with adults too. So why wouldn't it work with
Hmm.
ghosts?
Oh
Like,
yeah, it does.
you're so upset. You're so angry. Let's write a story about it. That's what they do in at my daughter's old preschool. Her little niece is going there now. And when they're upset, "Well, let's write a letter and talk about it." But I don't want anything to do with possession, even though that runs in my family. I have to draw the line at all these things that I do.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like, I
You
gotta
just
right.
do
draw a
the
line at
just got to do the horns when you don't want something coming near your spirit. Just push it
that.
away and ask it
So,
to be recycled back into the universe. Just go back.
oh, does that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's is very. It's just a shaman push.
Push.
Thank
Hmm.
you. Thank you. So if I sense it, I can be like, "I'm
Just
off
I'm off
duty."
duty. Yeah.
And I think that segues then to what we'll do next time, which is talk about what I'd like to talk about is power objects and so I'm a retired philosophy professor, and I taught philosophy of art and so on at Columbus College of Art and Design, for
Hmm.
39 years or something before I retired. I wrote a book about it, from idolatry to advertising. And what I'd like to talk about is how art and objects go together in order to in a spiritual way.